Jamo Rafiki, I'm Elizabeth from Kisiwa82 and I hope you're doing really well. If you're new to my channel, welcome, and if you've been here before, welcome back. It's Tuesday and today I'm going to be doing a review of the books I read in February for the Invisible Cities project. So as always, there will be information to the Invisible Cities project as well as all the books I talk about down in the description below. So the countries for February were China, Colombia, and Egypt. So let's talk about that. For China, I had planned on reading a book, I think it's the 3-Body Problem. It ended up I was not in the mood for kind of a sci-fi book. So what I ended up doing instead was getting 2 graphic novels. So the first one was called My Beijing, 4 Stories of Everyday Wonder. Now I will leave, as I said, down below the titles of the books, the authors, as well as the translators, so you can take a look at that. This particular book is interesting because it's a middle grade book, and I don't think I've ever read a middle grade book in translation before. So my library happened to have one, so I picked up a copy. And what this is a collection of 4 short stories. It's about this really young girl and her grandfather. So each one of these stories basically has kind of a slice of life every day. Here's what's happening in this girl's life. And here's the relationship she has with her grandfather and some surrounding neighbors. What was so lovely is the relationship that this girl has with her grandfather. It's really sweet. Now, unusually as well, I was surprised to see that this book has got the main character, this young girl, it has actually got a disability. So she walks around either primarily with kind of a walking stick, or she's kind of moved around by her grandfather in this tricycle kind of gizmo. The thing that I found interesting is that they don't spend time, the author does not at all spend time talking about what happened. It's just, we are dropped into the life of these people, this girl, her grandfather, her friends, the neighbors, and they are in 4 stories. We get kind of a slice of life, as I said. Now, if you are looking at understanding more about China or Beijing in particular, this is not necessarily an entree or an entry point into understanding the culture, but I think it just really wonderfully explores a relationship between a girl and her grandfather. And the twist here is that there's magic. There's like a magical element to these stories, in that something magical happens. Not in the way we use the word magical, but there is magic, right? The idea of, again, but the magic system is not explained. Just each story has kind of have this magical twist to it. Lovely, the stories are cute. The illustration here, though, is why this book is worth picking up. They are beautiful watercolors, illustrated. It's loose, it's lovely. I really enjoyed it. So I gave this one 3 stars. So while I was reading that particular graphic novel, there was another book that showed up on my library hold systems, which was another graphic novel, but this is more of a nonfiction graphic novel, and it's called Tiananmen 1989, Our Shattered Hopes. Again, author and translators are linked down below. The thing about this one is, I know, again, what do we learn in school? What do we end up learning as we get older? So those of us who read tend to pick up more history along the way. But one of the things I found really interesting here is I actually do know very little about Chinese history in general. They have a very long history. Tiananmen Square is a phrase. I understand the protest from the student point of view. I have a 30,000 foot level understanding of that event. For example, I thought it was a one-day thing, right? And there's this image about this guy who stands in front of a tank that went around the world. So I did not understand that this particular protest, the student protest, went on for a very long period of time. I didn't understand the players both on the student side, the activist side, as well as what was happening on the political side. So this is kind of told from the point of view of one of the organizers, one of the activists in this particular movement, and I think he was a teacher at the time. at the local university in Beijing. And, you know, there are snippets to things like the whole re-education idea or philosophy of the Chinese government. So the book, thankfully, starts off with kind of a really quick bio of who all the key players are going to be in this story. Now, unfortunately, since I did not know much about the history or the people at play here, a lot of these names were new to me. So as I was reading through the book, there are things that I got and there are things that I didn't. I think it's a really great entryway or an entry point into this topic in general, if like me you were unfamiliar with it. Because the thing about reading it in graphic novel or comic format, as I've mentioned before, it's a really nice entree into learning about something that you know nothing about. So you get to meet all the players in this particular protest. You get to see how the public, the local public reacted to the protest. You get to see the college kids and what was happening with them. I did not realize that they had set up basically a tent city in Tiananmen Square. And the connection to Russia with Gorbachev coming in, these were all interesting. But again, as I said, there are things I really missed because I was not already aware of a lot of the history and the players here. A really good introduction. The story or the narration is told from this person, as I said, who was there, and he has kind of, for the most part, all the people in the comic are actual people, but I think he also uses some kind of, you know, what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of a multi-layered person or people that he kind of creates from a variety of different actual real people. I did not know, for example, again, there's horrible things that happen throughout history in every country, in any time where there are citizens protesting something the government is trying to make happen or trying to oppress the people. There's always a fallout there. The fact that people would say simple things, what I would consider very simple things, and be sentenced to 15 years in prison, right? There are a lot of these intelligentsia of this particular movement from the Chinese activists and student body who've since then left China and are in various parts of the West. The author is someone who ended up in France, and so he's telling the story kind of as a, you know, a retrospective, a historical look back at his interaction and his experience with this, as well as telling us about who the key players were on that stage, both on the student activist side as well as on the political side. The art is good. In some cases, it's kind of more heavy text-based than you would expect from a typical comic. But again, I think because there is this expectation that you might know nothing about it like me, he does lay it out pretty well. It really felt as though he was a professor giving a lecture. There's actually scenes of him standing in what looks like in front of a stage talking out to us, the audience. I really liked this one. Like I said, a great way to learn about something I knew very little about, and I will certainly be looking into more about the history in general. So I would recommend this one, and I gave this one 3 stars. So for the China option, I went with 2 comics this time as opposed to prose novels. And there was kind of a nice break in terms of reading, because one of the things about books that get translated, a lot of times there are difficult material, and so there's only so much of that you can read at any given point in time. The second country I want to talk about, or second of the three countries, was Egypt. Now, this was an interesting one too, because there are many books on Egypt that I have wanted to read. I'm fascinated by the whole Egyptology, archaeology, right? So, but reading a book by someone in the country, written, that's translated, I think is an interesting thing, because there's a whole conversation about what works tend to be translated and into English, which is the only language I can read, and why. Why do certain works get translated? Because clearly, lots of them do not. And so this particular book, what I decided to do was go with Mahfouz. Now, Mahfouz is a author whose book, The Palace Walk, I think it's called the Cairo Trilogy. I read the first book, The Palace Walk, and really loved it. It was very much a close-up look of a particular family in Cairo. I have not gotten to the other two books in that series, and I might actually end up picking that back up. This one is a shorter novella, and it was called Love in the Rain by Mahfouz. And again, translator and all that stuff is in the box down below. What was interesting about this is, again, what Mahfouz does is take you in and show you a slice of life. You get a very close-up look at a bunch of characters in Cairo set after the 7-Day War of 1967, okay, and the fallout of that in this particular group of people. Now, when as in most cases, I tend not to read the blurb, so I'm kind of walking in cold. I don't really know what's happening. So you meet a person, and then you're trying to figure out, why am I meeting this person? And then you meet somebody else. And again, there's no necessarily connection between the first person and the second person. And then all of a sudden, you start to realize that every single person that you are meeting are connected. It's a very small world. So set in Cairo, I really liked a lot of what Mahfouz is exploring here. He's exploring sexuality. He's exploring morality, religion versus sexuality. He does bring up, there's gay elements in here that get explored, like love in all its ways, right? Love in all its forms in some ways. There is an exploration of gender politics when it comes to sexuality and what's okay for men and not okay for women. There is an exploration of this dichotomy between what the religious government and the religious people and society in general say is okay, and then there's what's actually happening on the streets. This kind of harkens back to one of the books I read for Morocco, Sex and Lies, for January, okay? So that very similar themes, only this is actually a fictionalized version, so he gets to explore that concept in greater depth here. It's a very short book. I think it was about 140 pages maybe. The thing that I was surprised by, because I remember loving his Palace Walk, this book doesn't read as well. And I don't know whether it's the translation by Nancy Roberts or if it's just how he wrote it. There's a lot of what I consider to be unnecessary melodrama. I mean, in some ways, it felt like I was reading an Egyptian soap opera. So, think of the melodrama when you think of a soap, and that's kind of what happens here on the page. So that was kind of a little jarring, and again, I'm not sure if that's a translation issue or that's really how he decided to write this particular novella. And so anytime that, and it happens all the time, like literally every page has got some of this melodrama there, and you're like, wait a minute, what is happening? Why are you writing it in this way? And then he will say he will write a couple of sentences that would be worthy of putting on a t-shirt, okay? So this happens throughout these 140 pages. You get to explore the lives of these characters, you get to see the decisions that they make, you get to, you might not, and in my case, I didn't agree with all the decisions, but you get to understand, here's the framework these characters have to operate within. Again, a tad too melodramatic for my taste, a tad too soap opera-ish for my taste, but in general, a book that like I said, a lot of the lines, there are specific lines in almost every page that I really found noteworthy. Just, insightful, incisive writing when it came to those sections surrounded by tons of melodrama. So I gave this one 3 stars. I would recommend it, but I'm not sure if this was, I don't know where this falls in the timeline of Mahfouz's writing. I mean, he is one of those Egyptian writers that is kind of a well-known name. So I'm not sure where it falls in his body of work. But like I said, I just remember Palace Walk being a much more engrossing, well-written without this kind of jarring melodrama. And yet again, it could be that he was just writing in a totally different style in this novella, making it more of a soap opera. And if you happen to know or you have thoughts about that, I would love to hear more. So please let me know. And finally, for the final country, Colombia, I read a book that has been on my TBR forever, and that is 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel García Márquez. Again, translator information is down below. Márquez is someone that's a household name. I don't think I need to talk about him, but GGM, as I'm calling him, I don't know why it took me so long to read him. And actually, let me paraphrase that. I believe part of the reason that it's taken me so long to read him is so many people that I trust, so many readers I trust, have really disliked this book. And he's writing in general. So, Colombia, might as well. I mean, if you're going to pick a Colombian writer, I figured, and you haven't read him, this is a place to start. I loved every minute of this book. So I listened to the audiobook, which was incredibly well narrated by John Lee, who's in general an amazing audio narrator anyway. But he narrates this book in particular brilliantly. So what is it about? I think in some ways it's maybe the history of Colombia told in this really microscopic detail way look at a family. So it's the Buendia family. We start the story, meet with the patriarch, Jose Arcadio Buendia, and his long-suffering wife, Ursula, and they have children. And the thing is, this culture, and the whole thing is set in this fictionalized town of Macondo, okay? Now, the thing about this culture, as with a lot of cultures, the names repeat in every generation. So usually there's a Jose Arcadio Buendia, then there's a Jose Arcadio, and then there's an Aureliano Buendia, and those names switch back and forth in generations. And many people have said this, it's actually kind of difficult to keep track of which particular Buendia you are listening to or you're reading about, okay? However, I think Márquez does such a good job of giving you something about each one of these characters that you can hold on to. And Colonel Aureliano Buendia, there's a specific kinds of tics, if you will, that he gives these characters that when you hear that, you know which character this is. And it's beautifully written. It is engrossing, as I said. It is crazy. So this family, in many ways, is crazy. There is love. There is betrayal. There is, at one point, there are 17 or 27 sons that show up and that you did not know about. There is murder. There is the colonialization and what happens when the banana factory, the banana company moves in and what it does to the local people. There is, in the middle of all these fun and games of this particular family, there is the repression of the government when the workers go on strike. Okay, so the juxtaposition of the funny, crazy, insane things that happen with what happens when there's money to be made in a region. Okay, so the thing is, and I understand people who've said this, the magical realism either works for you or it doesn't. And one of the things that I've found is when I'm reading Latinx authors or South Asian authors, they work much better for me because I think for some reason those cultures have a way of incorporating magical realism into how they tell stories that seem natural and not forced. So there's a lot of magical realism in this story. And, when you first start, I was like, wait, what's happening? And then I decided, go with it. The thing is, you have to just trust Márquez to take you along for the ride, and he does. The unexpected thing for me here was the humor. I think I laughed out loud throughout this book. Almost every section had something that made me laugh out loud. So, the story of the Buendias, set in this town of Macondo, we go over, the period of time of 100 years or so. Characters live to very long ages or don't. And what's funny is while we are trying to figure out which Buendia, Aureliano or Jose we're talking about, they themselves are trying to figure it out because there's a lot of, this is actually that person's son or grandson or great-grandson, and nobody knew that, right? So the characters themselves are navigating this. There's a lot of interesting exploration of foreigners coming into town, insiders versus outsiders. There is interesting conversations about religion and faith and how that plays into all of this. There are interesting conversations about just what makes a family. and how do you as a family stay cohesive? Literally, I am smiling and laughing on the inside as I even think about some of the scenes as I'm talking to you about this book. Okay, highly recommend this. You have to trust Márquez. You have to be okay with magical realism, because some of the stuff that happens in here, there's some crazy stuff, all right? But that's part of what makes this book so powerful, is if you allow yourself to go along for the ride. I was swept away. And literally, I could not put this book down. When I had to put it down, I was like, I'm thinking about the characters. I'm wondering what they're going to do. I'm wondering about certain scenarios, because again, there are really problematic relationships in this book, right? There are older men with younger women. There are older women with younger men. They are, some of these people are a little too tightly connected familially to be doing anything, and yet they do. Highly recommend, loved every minute of it. I am so glad I got to finally read my first Márquez, 5 stars, and I am absolutely going to add the rest of his stuff to my TBR and move them up higher, because I could not believe how well he told the story and how entertaining and informative and engrossing this was. Highly recommend this. Loved it. If you haven't tried it, or you've been afraid to try it, or you read it when you were in school because they made you read it and you bailed, give it another try. See if you don't love it as much as I do. If you read any of these books, I'd love to hear about what your thoughts were. If you read different books for this project, for these 3 countries, and you have videos I can go take a look at, please let me know. The countries coming up for March this month are Libya, Mexico, and Iraq. Those are my 3. I already have my book selected for each one of these. Again, I'm looking for not necessarily really difficult material, because goodness knows there are a lot of horrible things happening in the world, in fiction as well as in real life, and sometimes you just need a break from all of that, right? So that's what I have for you today. I'd love to know what you thought about these books if you've read them and what you're reading. Until I talk to you next time, happy reading. Bye.